Let's do it.
Just throw it down.
Welcome to The Classical Mind, a podcast about the great books in the Western canon. We're your hosts. I'm Father Wesley Walker,
And I'm Dr. Junius Johnson.
and we are here today to do a bonus episode, kind of outside of our normal range of things, just for fun. We recently did an episode on Frankenstein, the novel by Mary Shelley, and within a month or two of us doing that episode, Netflix released a new film adaptation of Frankenstein, directed by Guillermo del Toro, starring Oscar Isaac as Victor Frankenstein and Mia Goth as Elizabeth and Christopher Waltz as a sort of made up character. And so, anyways, it was a very interesting movie. We thought we could talk about it for a little while. I think to frame the conversation, Junius, I'm interested about your thinking about film adaptations of classic works. In other words, if you were to sit down and make a film adaptation of something, how faithful do you think you should try to be to the original source material?
No, that's a great question. It is an adaptation, and I think it's really important to lean on that because film is a different medium than either literature or even the stage. And so I think that it is important, a story interacts with its form, right? And it should, and in the best ways it ought to. So if you're writing something as an epic poem, um, the story should be a bit different. The way you tell the story, at any rate, should be a bit different because you're doing it in epic poetry as opposed to doing it in prose, novel form. And so I think that there's definitely um, not only permission but even a mandate for adapting the story. And this is what I had to come to accept this. The Lord of the Rings movies, the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, really brought me to a crisis as a literature scholar who's also a lover of film, trying to think about what the relationship between the book and the film should be. And it was really helpful for me because at first I was just salty. And maybe we'll do a bonus episode on the movies when we've read the books later on. But I didn't like a lot of the changes that Peter Jackson did, and we can talk about that later on, I suppose. But but I loved the movies though. At the end of the day, like I didn't like a lot of the changes, and yet I still really enjoyed the films. And so I thought, okay, what's going on here? And that led me on a journey to where I came to the realization that I have been thinking about films and their relationship to the books that they're based on incorrectly. Previously, I considered the film to be a version of the book. And inevitably, when I approached a film in that way, I was disappointed. What I came to believe after the experience with Lord of the Rings movies is that the film is a version of the story of which the book is itself a version. The story of the Lord of the Rings could have been told in epic poetry rather than in novel form. It could have been a stage play or a series of stage plays. I
Has
suppose
been.
there's any number of forms you could pour it into. Behind any particular form is the tale itself. These hobbits going to destroy the One Ring, and all of the captains of the West resisting the might of Sauron, and so on and so forth. Just because the first version of the story happened to be the book version doesn't mean that that somehow shuts down all other possible versions of the story. So approaching it that way, it really opened up for me the space to think about, okay, as a filmmaker coming in to do this, you might ask yourself, what is this story? And what are the important dynamics of the story? And how do I want to vision those in the film without having to constantly refer back to the book and make sure that you're lining things up one to one, right? So, a lot of long background answer to finally answer your question. I personally think that there is a great deal of latitude in adapting a story for film, but the controlling factor has always got to be the logic of the story itself. You should still be trying to tell the story that the book is trying to tell. Otherwise, I feel like we're moving beyond adaptation and into something like, based on,
Yeah.
inspired by, right? Inspired by true events could still be 100% false and have no relation to the true events at all. It's just the stuff the true events made you think of. And I feel like when you don't hold yourself to the logic of the original story, when your changes don't arise out of a desire to highlight aspects of the story that have always been there, then you're moving away from adaptation and into inspired by.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think one other aspect of adaptation that I would highlight is that it's almost like translation in a way.
Mm,
So that the story is being translated to the audience first in a visual way, right? I mean, if you
hmm
just read the book, there's not the visual aspect to it, but also in terms of bridging contexts, right?
hmm
So, when Christopher Nolan does his Odyssey film, he is doing that for modern American people or Western people largely,
hmm
living in the 21st century. And so I think there will be things that will be emphasized or aspects of the story that might be drawn, perhaps even things added that might help to bridge the gap between what Homer was doing and what we are interested in, the questions we're asking, and those kind of things.
hmm
Um, I think one example of this that was really interesting was the Green Knight movie a few years
mm,
ago. I don't know. Have you seen that one?
I have.
A24. I actually really liked it. It was
Mm,
very different from the source material, and the
yes.
ending especially was very different. And at the end of the book, Gawain kind of takes off the girdle and submits himself to the Green Knight's challenge, and it kind of just ends. But I think the point in that was that for a modern person, we're not thinking in terms of like chivalry and stuff like that. So I don't know that that logic would have worked quite the same way. But he was doing the right thing at the end for the just because it was the right thing.
hmm
And it doesn't matter what the consequences were. In other words, I think it was kind of a way of eschewing consequentialism and that kind of stuff. So anyway, so I thought that was a really interesting twist to the end. It's not faithful to the source material, and if you go into the book thinking this is going to be the exact same thing, obviously you're going to be disappointed. But I don't think that means that movie wasn't worth watching or wasn't good. I thought actually it
hmm
was a good movie. Um, and so, generally speaking, I don't believe that you have to have a one to one,
Yeah.
in order to make it a good film adaptation. That said, I think the next question we could ask is the Frankenstein film a good adaptation of the novel?
Yeah. My answer is no.
I agree with you. Why?
I'm gonna say this is interesting. I also I kind of want to look at two things over the course of this conversation, and the degree to which I do so will depend on your answer to my next question. Did you get a chance to listen to A.S. Peterson's stage version?
I did not. I was unfortunately sick over the
Yeah,
weekend and did not have time to do anything. So
no
I'm
worries.
sorry I didn't. Yeah.
No worries. I will say some things about it over the course of the conversation, but I won't thematize it too much. But I think that it is that'll be my end note. Readers will put that up early on. A.S. Peterson, also known as Pete Peterson of the Rabbit Room, has recently done a stage adaptation of Frankenstein, and I would recommend getting the audiobook from Amazon because rather than having someone read it, they've hired actors and had them act it out like a radio drama, and they did a very good job. And especially the woman playing Elizabeth is just sublime. It's a wonderful performance. But I mention it here because I think that both, and I thought that Peterson's version was a much more faithful. I would say yes to your question to his version and no to Toro's, and so they're very distinct in my mind. But they share something in common that I think is very much a product of how our age looks at the Frankenstein story that I think is a pretty significant departure from what Mary Shelley was trying to do with the story. And that is that both of these versions, which came out within a month of each other, are pro monster. And I even the word monster I shouldn't use. That's Frankenstein's word for the creature. It is neither the creature's word for himself. That's his question is what am I? And it's also not the narrator. It's not Mary Shelley's word for him, even though most of the story we get through Victor's words, and so it's kind of hard to separate that out. But creature is a good word for him because it marks him as something created, and that's what we want here. But I think that it's clear to me that in Del Toro's version, the monster is the hero, and at the end of the movie, he receives absolutely he receives Victor's confession. Victor asks for forgiveness, and he grants forgiveness to Victor. He doesn't need to ask for forgiveness himself because he actually hasn't done anything wrong in Del Toro's version. He is a pure victim. Um, Even the death of William is a complete accident that is not attributed to his malice in any way. The death of Elizabeth is migrated over to Victor. All of the monster's sins are migrated to Victor. Um, and so the monster himself is just the victim of Victor's continual rejection of him and continual failure to see him as a person. I think this is a deep betrayal of the original story because I think the original story is it wants us, the whole point of the story I felt was to wrestle with the question of what does it mean to be a monster? Are there any monsters in this story? And if there are there one or two, right? And if there's one, which one? And I think that to take the monster side and retell the story from the assumption that the monster is innocent and just a victim is to beg the question that the story is asking. Right. You're starting off with an answer, and so you're really refusing to engage in the conversation that Shelley set up with the original story that she was presenting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's largely correct. I think the other reason that I'm not sure this is a great adaptation is that while I don't think you have to be faithful to every detail of the book, I
Hmm.
also don't think you should just change things to change them. And
Yes.
there are some things that change, some significant things that change in the
Yes.
movie that I don't think add to the telling of the story at all. So for
I
example, I
agree.
think the most egregious example of this would be the character of Elizabeth,
Mm,
who, in the novel, she is kind of brought into Frankenstein's father's guardianship as a young child. She grows up with Victor. They fall in love. They are engaged to be married. And she really represents a kind of innocence, I think, in the
hmm.
novel.
Yes.
Whereas in the movie, Victor doesn't meet her until he's an adult, and she is engaged to his brother, and they have a kind of romance with each other that's kind of secret and illicit, and um, then she also meets the creature and is friends with him, shows him a kind of humanity and dignity that
Hmm.
Victor doesn't.
Hmm.
And so when she dies, of course, in the book, she's killed by the monster. Um, and it's his way of getting back at Victor for not making him a mate.
Hmm.
In the movie, Victor kills her by accident. He accidentally
Hmm.
shoots her.
Yeah. Trying to
And
shoot the monster.
trying to shoot the monster. And so all of those changes, I'm not sure. I mean, they maybe contribute to being a little more pro monster, right? Because or pro creature because she shows that he has some goodness in him, because
Yeah.
he's able to relate. He likes her. He thinks she's beautiful. He wants to give her
Hmm.
gifts, those kind of things. But I don't. Part of the point I think of the novel is you have Victor's uh, drive to engage in this kind of science that is titillating. It's wrong. He knows it's wrong. He does it in secret. There's no big show of it, which is another difference, right? He in the
Hmm.
movie he does this big like lecture, public lecture, and all the
Hmm.
scientists are like, "Oh, this is an abomination," and he's like, "Oh, well, that's a good thing."
Yeah.
And so the whole point is there's this kind of shame aspect to it, right? Like from the beginning, he's kind of doing this secretly because he knows it's over the line.
Yeah.
Elizabeth is like this kind of innocent, she's like the angel on his shoulder, right? And so
Hmm.
he's in the middle of these two things, and it kind of tears him apart, and you see a lot of his agony, early on in
Hmm.
the novel because of
Yeah.
that. But Elizabeth ceases to function in any sort of real innocence when her relation to Victor is premised on this kind of illicit affair that
Yeah.
they are having. It totally removes that um, dynamic, and I thought that was kind of a shame. I mean, I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe if you want to avoid, maybe it's weird for a modern audience if they like grew up together and then they get
Hmm.
engaged, like they're almost siblings, and then all of a sudden they're engaged. Like that's
Hmm.
maybe too hard, but there are ways around that where you don't have
Yeah.
to
Just have him
make
meet him.
her
She doesn't
real.
have to be engaged to his brother. They can just meet as adults. That'd be
Yeah, yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or they could be childhood friends or anything. I mean, there's
Yeah.
tons of ways to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, going all the way back to the very first thing that you said that that the changes don't seem to be in the service of telling the story better. Um, they they're for some other reason, and I do agree that a number of the changes are to make the creature innocent. But there are also other changes that don't seem to make any sense, even with that in mind.
Victor's the relationship between Victor's parents
Just
and
about to
his
say that.
yeah, that is also another weird dynamic. I mean, in the book
Yeah.
his dad is maybe slightly severe, but he's not abusive or a total jerk, but in
I
the
don't think his
movie
dad's even severe in the book, and he's quite warm and loving. He loves his wife tenderly, and he's very supportive of his son and loves his son, very solicitous for his son. Is constantly pleading with him to come back and this sort of a thing. And when he shows up, because Victor's been accused of murder, and he's showing up to try to kind of help bring him home and all of this, he treats him very kindly. I thought he's a beautiful, wonderful father figure in the book, and they convert him into a harsh, mean man who doesn't really love his wife. He just married her for the money.
and
Um,
basically kills
possibly,
her.
possibly doesn't save her life when she's
Right.
dying from childbirth. And that's another thing in the books. Isn't it the case that she doesn't die in childbirth with William? She gets a disease later
Yeah,
on after
she
William's been
dies
born.
older. Yeah.
Yeah, both Del Toro and Peterson moved her death earlier on, and which is again weird. So and then he's so harsh on Victor. In the book, Victor's driven by his own internal thirst for knowledge. In the movie, he's being externally driven by his father, who wants to make sure that he's worthy of the Frankenstein name.
And there is an internal motivation in the movie that's a little different in that he wants to destroy, defeat death,
Yeah,
because of what happened to his mom.
right.
He's
Not
he's
because he's
definitely
just curiosity.
right, exactly.
Yeah,
It's not curiosity. It's like he feels wronged because of what happened to mom, and so
yeah.
he wants to be able to undo that or to not have that happen again. And there is kind of a weird mother connection throughout the book. So
Hmm.
one thing I should say, this is just sort of a joking observation, but the aesthetic of the movie includes a lot of vivid colors,
Hmm.
black, white, red, blue, green, especially. But it's sort of like aesthetically a little like Dune. If Dune had a baby with Wicked, I think that's kind of the aesthetic that and it's set in the 1800s. Um, he has I think the death of the mother in the movie is interesting because it makes him have like a sort of weird problem with attachment.
Mm.
And we were talking about this before we started recording, but there are in almost every scene during Act One, he is drinking milk at some point, and I do think that is connected to the mother issue.
Yeah.
And there's one kind of stark instance of this when they're at the meal where he first meets Elizabeth and he actually pushes the milk away at one point, and then after he makes some kind of connection with her, he like picks it back up. And so it's kind of a weird thing, like he sees her as a kind of replacement for his mother, um, which again I think makes that relationship much weirder than it
Yeah.
needs to be.
Yeah.
um, and Elizabeth at the beginning, so the mom is wearing red almost exclusively during the opening when she's around. Victor wears a lot of black. When he first meets Elizabeth, she's wearing blue.
Mm.
And then later, after they start kind of flirting and getting together, she starts wearing black and red or more red colors, which I think is
Hmm.
interesting. So she becomes kind of a mother figure, um, which I don't know is strange. I suppose in one sense she's kind of motherly towards the creature,
Hmm.
um, when she
Well,
meets him, and
I
perhaps
I
she's
kind of felt
motherly.
at the end, I kind of wondered if she'd fallen in love with the creature because she's kind of speaking to him almost like a lover at her as she's dying in his arms.
Well,
It's not super clear, but I wondered.
clearly this all is getting muddled by the fact that Victor has this weird mother attachment
Yeah.
thing where he also sees her as a mother figure. So I don't know, but I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting. And in a way, I guess she kind of tries to mother Victor. I mean, even though they are lovers, but she's trying to like help him to see the good in the creature and stuff, and push back
Right.
against some of his dehumanizing um behaviors towards him. But of course, it doesn't work.
Yeah. He treats the creature the way his father treated him.
Yes.
And that's because, in his father, it's all about the Frankenstein name, which is my name. And so this is that type, that archetype of a father for whose relationship with his son is, you better not shame me. You have a responsibility to, make my legacy great. And Victor feels the same way towards the monster. Del Toro does have a Catholic background. I don't think he's a believer at any sense, but he certainly has that cultural background. And I wonder, therefore, if these female figures associated with blue and red, it puts me in mind of iconography of the Virgin Mary.
Yeah,
And we do have in the movie, there's this angel figure, this statue that Victor hallucinates about after his mother's death, and he believes he gets a vision from it that promises him that it will help him to conquer death. And then later in the movie, that angel is transformed into a demon. So I think he invites the comparison there to the religious
yeah,
motifs, and so there is a sense in which the blue representing blues for divinity and red is for humanity, right? In iconography, I sometimes get
yeah,
these confused
yeah,
precisely because of the way they work in the Virgin Mary and Christ, where you'll see Mary with blue underneath and red over top, and Christ with red underneath and blue over top,
yeah.
and these sorts of things. But there is that sense then of a movement in Elizabeth from the more divine to the more human, even as she comes more in line with the mother figure of Victor. I wouldn't be surprised if all of that were intentionally at play in those color choices.
The other color that she's associated with is green. She wears a green. She wears green when she meets the monster or the creature
Mm.
for the first time. She also has an interest in bugs and small
Mm-hmm.
things,
Yep.
um, which is interesting as well. Um,
Yeah. So Victor is essentially then Victor is given all the typical modern psychoses, right? I mean, he's a Freudian down the line where he's got this bad relationship with his father that he's doomed to perpetuate with his quote unquote children. He has this obsessive relationship with his mother, which is doomed to control how he loves women going forward. Um, the first when Victor's father dies in the movie, very early on. And that was the first moment when I was really like, what? Even though I already didn't like the fact that there was not a loving marriage between his parents, where in the book they're deeply, I mean, they're a wonderful couple and they're completely agreed about adopting Elizabeth, and it's a very happy home. But it was when Victor's father died, I was like, okay, what are we doing? Like, I don't understand what's happening anymore. And and then the next blow that just rocked my world was when William grows up to be an adult rather than being killed as a child, and then is engaged to Elizabeth. And I'm just thinking, so we don't care about the original story at this point. Like, this is clearly a Frankenstein flavored beverage. It was the feeling that I got by that point. And I was trying very hard not to just, say, hang on, why is he making these changes? Why is he doing these things? And the best I can come up with is the changes that are not for the sake of migrating the monster's guilt to Frankenstein seem to be for the sake of explaining Frankenstein's wicked behavior in terms of the traditional modern psychological accounts of why people do things. Right? He had a hard father, he was in love with his mother, and that diseased his libido such that he fell in love with his brother's wife. I mean, that's the only thing I could kind of come up with. And I thought to myself, well, but that has nothing to do with the original story is so theological, right? It's surprisingly theological, and his so much of the monster's outlook is shaped by the fact that he only has three books, and one of them is Paradise Lost. And the relationship, the understanding that Milton gives him of the relation of a creator to a creature, and then he compares Victor to that. It was a very strange set of choices to me.
you also get a weird kind of emphasis too, I think, because I think Mary Shelley is still thinking in terms of virtues and vice,
Hmm.
right? Habits, right? Because curiositas, right? That's
Hmm.
Victor's kind of big vice is he's too curious,
Yeah,
and it causes him to go over a line somewhere. Um,
yeah.
as moderns, we don't think about virtue theory, at least not enough. But we do think about choice because
Hmm.
choice is what matters. So there are a couple telling moments I think early in the movie, um, where when they're at the dance, Victor asks Elizabeth to dance, and she
Hmm.
says, "Well, that would hardly be appropriate, or that hardly seems appropriate, or something like that." And he says, "Well, does anything?"
Hmm.
And then Later, Elizabeth says, choice is the seat of the soul, the one gift God granted us, as she runs away from him because he's trying to
Hmm.
initiate a romantic, connection. And so you see that kind of shift, right? It's not about virtue or vice because those can be explained by, his psychological
Yeah.
problems or whatever, or conducive conditions for the
Yeah.
virtues. So
And
what
maybe they're
really
also kind
only
of conventional, and so who we don't even agree about what those things are.
true, true. So everything is reduced to choice, the exertion of
Yeah.
will. And I mean, again, I'm not necessarily saying that's a terrible thing. I mean, choice is an important thing, but it helps us think about choice when we connect it to virtue in some way,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
And I just don't. I think that's downplayed in the movie, but that's a pretty
Yeah.
big part of the novel.
Yeah. Yeah. Those two scenes you referenced there, those two bits of conversation gave me a kind of Nietzschean feel about the morality of the movie. That it's sort of, the strength of your will is what really matters more so than what it's actually on. You don't ever get Elizabeth after feeling herself drawn to Victor, and giving in to that attraction, to a point when Victor wants to move the relationship further forward and, make it okay. Yes, we're explicitly doing this thing, and maybe we're going to become lovers and that sort of a thing. She pulls back at that point, and then she never seems tempted to go back into it. And even when she slaps him at one point, and she really tries to maintain that distance, and she doesn't waver in her choice of his brother. Um, Even though you get the feeling she's choosing against her heart, but she has chosen, and she's going to stand by her choice. And that's what she says on her wedding day when he talks to her. She says, "I've chosen." Um, so I really appreciate that about her, but it's not, Victor's point about what, is anything really appropriate? Like maybe nothing's appropriate. That's kind of, for someone who has been trying to undo death, and is willing to go to all sorts of morbid and, ends that would be condemned by the society that he lives in. That's a reasonable moral place for him to find himself. Um, but for Elizabeth, never really seems to push back against that interpretation of the nature of morality, which I would say is that it's entirely conventional, and therefore, great minds like Victor and whoever he wants to include in that are capable of, just tossing it aside because of their by virtue of their very greatness. Elizabeth never really repudiates that. Her response is really just, well, what I choose to do with my will is something different than what you want me to choose to do with my will.
Right.
But that at the end of the day, then that still seems to me a very Nietzschean approach to virtue, where what's virtuous is that you, follow your own inner greatness and impose that on the world around you.
Yeah.
Whereas the original story, you see, here's the thing. Adaptions don't have to have the same philosophical outlook as the original story. I'm not saying that if you disagree with the original story about the meaning of things, then you can't be a faithful adaptation. But I will say that when this original story thematizes a philosophical question as integral to the story it's telling, then your relationship to that question is to some extent controlled. You don't have to reach the same conclusion, but you have to honor the question.
Yeah.
And I feel like the two questions of, the monster's repeated question of what am I? Right? We know what Victor is. He's a man because Adam is what God made in Genesis, and that's what Victor is. Victor made him, and so what is he? Is he a man? Is he not? Is he a monster? Is that the right word? That's one question the book is demanding that we ask. And another question is demanding that we ask is, how do you assess what is right and wrong to do? And it assumes that no, there are absolute lines, and both Victor and the monster are condemnable for their choices on the by reference to these lines that aren't the conventions of the society they live in. They're actually, in Mary Shelley, they're the truths of nature.
Yeah. Which actually raises an interesting, I think, point about the movie where I do think Del Toro's maybe theology comes through a little bit, and that I think he really very intentionally makes the monster a sort of second Adam.
Yeah.
And Victor is clearly the first Adam in a way.
Hmm. Hmm.
Victor is naked when he creates the monster, which I thought
Hmm.
was interesting. Um,
Yes.
and when he finally pieces all the parts together, says it is finished.
Hmm.
And right before, or earlier in the movie when he's giving his lecture, he animates a corpse as part of his
Hmm.
lecture, and one of the scholars there even says, "Well, that wasn't a demonstration or a science experiment; it was a crucifixion."
Hmm.
When Elizabeth first meets the monster, he's bleeding out of his side. These
Hmm.
kind of things. And then, of course, yeah, the fact that Victor has to make his confession to the monster at the end. I mean, all of this kind of makes the monster out to be a Christ-like, um, a Christ-like figure, which I think is interesting. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that because I love a
One more
Christ figure, but
one more piece of that is that the monster is unable to die.
right, unable to die. That's true.
In
That's
a
true.
sense that it was not true in Shelley, right? I mean, at the end of Shelley, if he does what he says he's going to do, he goes and builds a pyre and throws himself on it and perishes in the flames. In this movie, he gets blown up with a stick of dynamite and it doesn't kill him
I
because his
guess
flesh regenerates super quickly.
I guess one thing that really changes is that in the book there are these instances of violence the creature commits that we can't justify. When he kills the
Hmm.
child, when he kills
Hmm.
Elizabeth, that's
He even
malice.
when
That's
he frames just the Justine, when he frames
That's
the
right. That's
servant.
right. That's
Yeah,
absolutely right. All of that is really too far to justify. But when you see him as a Christ figure, when you see him as kind of completely innocent, his violence becomes a kind of judgment on a
yeah,
world that is violent.
yes.
Whereas I think the monster in the book, or the creature in the book, does act in a similar way in that he's a mirror.
Hmm.
He does take on a kind of violence, but it does seem kind of as a mirror effect. But in that
Yeah.
case, you can't justify him. But in this case, you can say, well, yeah, of course he was violent to this character or that character because they attacked him first, or because they, were caught up in this kind of system of evil and stuff, which I
Yeah.
think is interesting. Um, I don't I don't find it particularly compelling the way it's deployed in this, but I do think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Also, one other aspect of the first act of the movie that I think is should be drawn attention to is in the book, Victor recoils at the monster almost immediately because he
Hmm.
realizes what he's done.
Hmm.
In the movie,
He delights in him.
he loves the monster
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah.
like
Then
a
change him up.
pet.
Yeah, that's right. Like a pet.
He doesn't actually love he wants to
Hmm.
scientifically exploit the creature, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not real love, but he is kind of fascinated by him, thinks it's really cool. They do all these kind of things together for a while, and of course the creature really loves Victor.
Hmm.
um it's only really when the creature doesn't do what Victor wants him to do that Victor gets angry at the
Well,
creature. And
it's specifically when the creature doesn't display sufficient aptitude, right?
right,
So the first break is when the creature never says any word other than Victor.
right,
And he's like, "Oh, you're an idiot. Like you're supposed to be
right.
smart, and you're an idiot." And it takes Elizabeth to say to Victor, "The you are his whole world."
Yep.
And so all that he has in his heart to say is Victor. And then after she spends a little time with him, as Victor's about to attempt to kill the monster for the first of many times, and he says, say another word, give me a reason to save you. And he says, Victor. And Victor turns away in disgust, and as he's walking away, the monster says, Elizabeth. And that's what Victor asked for. And it's proof that the monster is not a moron, but it's the wrong word because Elizabeth is such a problem for Victor, and he begins in that moment to see the monster as a rival. Actually, he had before that began to see the monster as potentially a rival for Elizabeth's affections, and so he tries to destroy him. Um, I. I think that's so weird. It's the whole thing with the monster and Elizabeth that made it super weird.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Pete's version, he does a similar thing where Elizabeth meets the monster well ahead of the decisive final confrontation. And she responds to the monster the way that Victor responds in Del Toro's movie. She sees him and she's like, he's magnificent. And she's fascinated. And she offers him the human acceptance that in the book he's always looking for and he doesn't get from Victor, doesn't get from the folks in the cottage, right? He gets that from Elizabeth in Pete's version. And in the end, it's insufficient because he wants it from Victor. And so he chooses to kill Elizabeth, true to the original story, in that culminating scene. But he has to do it over her process protestations, where she's saying to him, if what you're looking for is acceptance from him, receive it from me instead. I accept you. I value you. I see you. But he's trying to get through to Victor. I love what you said about violence. I think one of the lines that was really good in Del Toro's version was late in the movie when the monster and Victor are out on the ice and Victor has once again tried to kill the monster and the monster's thrown him down and he says, "You only listen to me when I hurt you." Right? You only understand violence. It's the only language you get. And I thought that was quite good.
Yes, I did too. Um, one question I had, I don't know, I thought this was interesting. So obviously, so Victor burns the castle down with the monster presumably inside. And as
Hmm.
part of that, he loses his leg.
Hmm.
I don't, why?
I liked that. I thought that what it was showing was as he was attempting to hurt this thing that he was created, he fails to do that. The monster escapes through a water slide, a water chute. So his attempts to hurt the monster only hurt himself
Interesting.
and those he
Okay.
loves. And that's nice foreshadowing of the scene on the wedding night when he will trying to kill the monster, accidentally kill Elizabeth and bring about the death of his. And he lies and say the monster did it. And so as the men rush on him, that causes the accidental death of his brother, right? And as William's dying, he says to Victor, "I'm afraid of you. All of the calamities, they've all come from you."
Yep.
And I think that's the clearest moment of interpretation where that, and we can all see that as the viewers, we can see that he's right. Victor is the monster, and the creature is not.
Yes.
On that front, I wanted to, if you'll indulge me, I wanted to read a little bit from the end of the book, just to remind readers of what the monster's ending was like in the book. This is after Victor dies, um, and the monster says, well, the creature paused, looking on me with wonder, and again turning toward the lifeless form of his creator. He seemed to forget my presence, and every feature and gesture seemed instigated by the wildest rage of some uncontrollable passion. "That also is my victim," he exclaimed. "In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. O Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovest. Alas, he is cold. He cannot answer me." And the captain says, "Your repentance is now superfluous. If you had listened to the voice of conscience and heeded the stings of remorse before you had urged your diabolical vengeance to this extremity, Frankenstein would yet have lived." And the monsters, do you dream, said the demon. And this is in the words of the captain. "Do you dream, said the demon, do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? He continued, pointing to the corpse, he suffered not in the consummation of the deed. Oh, not the 10,000th portion of the anguish that was mine during the lingering detail of its execution. A frightful selfishness hurried me on, while my heart was poisoned with remorse. Think you that the groans of Clerval were music to my ears? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy, and when wrenched by misery to vice and hatred, it did not endure the violence of the change without torture such as you cannot even imagine." That's the heart of Mary Shelley's creature. And I don't see that at all in Del Toro's, and I see it but small in Peterson's. I think Pete could have done more, much more with that.
Mm. Yeah, no, if anything, the creature is innocent. And I mean, even the framing, right? The
Yeah.
framing
Yeah,
in the novel, the creature frames, which is not just an animalistic sin, right? I mean,
that's right.
Dante would put that at the very bottom of hell, that he's
Yeah.
able to use his reason to accomplish something like that.
Yeah.
is a horrible thing. But in the movie, he is framed,
Yeah.
and so yeah,
And
it's
and the
radical.
sin of yeah, that's right. And so he really does have nothing to confess in the movie. Like this entire scene would be jarring in the movie because you'd be like, well, you didn't do anything wrong. Like
Yeah.
all the bad things that happened were it's all been Victor.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And you kind of get some interesting, I guess, if you and I think the book is makes this easier to do, right? Because in the book, Victor is the creator and the creature is the created. And so
Hmm.
you have this struggle, right? I mean, that's why it's Promethean, is in the very title, right? It's the creature is struggling against his creator.
Hmm.
And in the movie, there is much more of a modern kind of God is silent or dead or cruel um attitude that the monster takes on, right? Like I called your name and understood that I was alone. You know,
Hmm.
the Victor was his world, but isn't anymore. There's a kind of loss there that
Hmm.
I think is much more reflective of the modern sort of person's way of thinking about these things.
God is
Yeah,
dead, right?
God is dead, or if he exists, he's kind of cruel, and is he
Yeah.
really worth worshiping at all?
Yeah.
Um, it seems to definitely come through at least at points.
Well, let's go back to the Promethean thing for a second, though, because I think that Shelley, the modern Prometheus, I think she intends this to apply to both of them. Right?
Yes, yeah,
Victor is
that's
the Prometheus stealing the fire of life giving from God and throwing it down among men, and then the monster is a Prometheus rebelling against the divine order, the not the divine order, the proper order, right? Rebelling against Olympus. But let's not forget, Prometheus is rebelling against a pantheon head, Zeus, who himself rebelled against his father. And so it's all, I think they both inhabit the role of Prometheus, and there's two different ways in which they instantiate the sin of Prometheus. Um, and that's what's at stake in not giving the monster his full agency and his full guilt. I think in the story, I mean, if at the end of the novel, I would conclude that both Victor and the monster were monsters. They were monsters of different sorts. Um, and yeah, Victor becomes less interesting in the movie because he carries all the guilt himself. His refusal to listen to anybody at any point becomes increasingly just unthinking, right? He's just locked into a course and he's not interested in any contrary evidence to what he has decided is true in his mind. He's completely driven by his psychoses.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's less interesting to me. I don't know, maybe that's more interesting to a general movie going audience. I mean the question a different question we haven't asked is um whether or not it's a good adaptation of the story. Has he told a story that will resonate well with his audience? Has he gotten that half of it right? Maybe what he's trying to speak he hasn't gotten right, but how he's speaking it to his audience, has he nailed that? Um, that's a harder question to answer.
yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. I think one telling point, to go back to your earlier comment about Nietzsche being present in the movie, is that after he has that encounter with the wolves, the creature, once he's living in the house, and of course
Mm,
in the book he lives in the little farmhouse and he watches that family, and he decides to approach the father who's blind, and um, there's a relationship that is established there, but then the children come back and they see him and they drive him out. Um, in the movie, they shoot at the monster earlier when they see
mm-hmm,
him,
mm-hmm,
and they leave, and the blind father's there, and so the monster establishes a relationship with him. That part is good, but then wolves come and
mm-hmm,
kill the blind man, and
mm-hmm.
the monster kind of attacks them. And at one point the creature says that um there's no hatred between hunters
Yes.
and wolves and sheep, but that it's just violence is inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
and he felt that that was true. that
Yeah,
nature,
they kill and are killed because of what they are.
yeah, nature produces violence kind of just for being yourself.
Hmm.
And I thought that was an interesting moment. Now, the
That is
other
really good.
interesting thing is when he does get his education at the hands of the blind man, um,
Hmm.
he does read some of the traditional books that he reads in the book. He reads the
Hmm.
Bible and he reads Paradise Lost.
Hmm.
Did you catch what other book or what other work they added to that
I don't
gave
remember.
the
What was
story?
it?
Ozymandias.
Oh, right. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah.
which I thought was interesting. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye
Look,
mighty
and
in despair.
despair.
Which is also quoted in Alien Prometheus, which I thought was interesting. That's what David quotes as he drops the bombs on the engineer planet.
Yeah,
Um, which I think,
nice.
yeah, interesting. So yeah, so he does read Paradise Lost, but it doesn't really come into the story the way that you would expect. I
Yeah,
mean, that's a big moment I think in the book
yeah,
and in the movie. I think it's almost like just an homage to the movie to the book, but
yeah.
I don't think it really shapes the story very much.
I think that's right. Well, and Ozymandias is a wonderful. I think it's a very insightful addition. But because applied to Victor, right? That look on my works in despair. Yeah, but at the same time, right? The irony of the Ozymandias poem is that the great works he expects you to look on the greatness of himself and be cowed, despair of your ever achieving such things of yourself. But in fact, the ravages of time have destroyed all but the face of the statue. And so, in a way that the King of Kings never intended, one might look on his works in despair because the works of men are all brought to naught in the end, no matter how great a king they were, right? And
which
all of that
is
stuff applies really well to Victor in the movie.
which is interesting though because the creature can't die.
Yeah, that's also true.
So the
Yeah.
creature's gonna live forever.
Yeah.
Um, so who knows what that does? I don't know. I don't know. Does that make the creature Ozymandias, but like a realized one, or does it make him? I don't know. Victor dies, so there's that
Hmm.
aspect, right? I mean, Victor will
Hmm.
be forgotten, but the
Well, and
creature
in a
will.
sense, the creature is his Victor's work in the most literal sense. But in the more significant sense, Victor's work is all of the lives that are destroyed, figuratively and literally, by his work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing about the ending that I thought we should bring up, not only is there a kind of confession and absolution that occurs, but the monster actually gives Victor the kiss of peace,
Hmm.
which liturgically is very, again, interesting, right?
Hmm.
That assumes that assumes a lot,
Yeah.
a kind of equality and a kind of fraternity. Um, Again, if you're looking at it through the lens of the first and the second Adam, that becomes a very beautiful thing. I think,
Hmm.
you know, that those of us who were born into the first Adam can receive the kiss of peace from the second Adam means we've been translated, you know, into the body. Um, but it feels very, I don't know, cheap, I guess, by the end of the movie. I don't know that there's really atonement that actually takes place.
Hmm.
Maybe the atonement was listening to the creature story and hearing his perspective, but I don't know.
Yeah. It didn't, yeah, that was under, it just kind of felt like Victor had been clenched the whole movie and he finally at death unclenches. And that's the only change that accounts for his, really kind of unexpectedly asking for forgiveness from he offers forgiveness. He says that he forgives the monster. The monster doesn't ask to be forgiven, and I think that's important. That the monster recognizes he really hasn't done anything that needs to be forgiven, but then he asks for his forgiveness, and it did kind of seem like it came out of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah,
If you want to push this Christological reading though, then here's another piece of it. The monster's body is made up of lots of parts of other bodies.
yeah.
And so there's a lovely image, if you will, of the body of Christ being having many members and being made up of all peoples and nations and that sort of a thing, but brought into a higher unity, given a life where they were dead before and given life in him.
Yes. And the monster's soul, his person is not merely the amalgamation of those things.
Hmm.
He's not,
And yeah.
though there is in a moment, if I remember correctly, where he does talk about having maybe some memories of things that happened to the members of the body that he
Hmm.
has. Like he almost, I think at one point he talks about having kind of a flashback or a memory of war because most of the body parts were taken from dead soldiers.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, but his what he is, who he is
Hmm.
not just a collection of those people.
Yeah.
He's something else that incorporates those people into
Yeah.
himself.
That's right.
And so yeah, there is something there for sure.
Yeah.
The the ending of the movie, the very
Mm.
end, is a quote by Mary Shelley. Uh Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. I I suppose um that quote, which comes from the novel, um, does embody a lot of what she's trying to do.
Mm.
And in that quote, even I think in the context of that quote, there is a sort of mention of Adam, right? I
Mm.
ought to be thy Adam. I am rather the fallen angel. Um, but I thought that was an interesting ending.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Um, because it speaks to the monsters defending himself even in spite of all the pain that he's gotten. Um, it speaks to defending the monster's right to exist because once it is alive, then we become, a reasonable person becomes a defender of his right to life once he is alive, that sort of a thing. Um, uh, as far as Victor goes, I mean, does it dis describe his obsession with gaining mastery over death, which he conceives of as serving life, right? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And
It's
actually,
clearer to me in the case of the monster than in the case of Victor.
I think I maybe misquoted that actually. I think that was the sorry. The quote I just read was from the book. I tried to pull it up real quick on the internet and somebody had fixed it and that's what I was looking at. It's actually a Lord Byron quote that
Oh,
they
that's
read
right. I
at the
remember that
end of
now.
the book, but I'm trying to find what exactly
Because I thought that was
said.
clever since it was, Byron was one of the three at the original conception of, ooh, let's all write horror stories.
Well,
And she quotes Byron a couple times in the novel too.
and it's interesting because I don't think there's really a part in the movie where they explicitly quote the book, but I do
Hmm.
think, but they do. There are some allusions to like Percy Shelley stuff,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
Mary Shelley gets no. She gets kind of, I don't know. The heart will break and brokenly live on. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember seeing what the Byron attribution at the end of it. Now that you mention that, but I can't remember what the line was.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Um, I don't. Again, it's one of those things that feels like a slight swing and a miss.
Well, and the other interesting thing is that Ozymandias, Percy wrote Ozymandias
That's right.
in
That's right.
in 1818, the same year the first version of Frankenstein came out.
Interesting. Huh. In terms, so let's say you bracket the question about adaptation. Do you think this was a well done movie?
I think so. From a technical standpoint, from production, all of those things, it was well done. I think it was well acted. I think that the cinematography was very lovely. Um, it shows, Del Toro has got a very particular eye, but a very artistic eye, and I think it shows. I wouldn't be surprised if it were nominated for, set design or something or cinematography, things like that. It's not best movie quality at all, whatever that means to Hollywood these days. I think it seems to be who can do the weirdest thing in the most artistic way. But I think it is. I can't say it's a bad movie. And when I think about it, just as so never mind the story that it's claiming to be a version of, just as a story that it's telling on its own. It kind of is a modern Prometheus in the sense of late modernism, right? If Mary Shelley is a early modernism, it's kind of a late modern Prometheus. And so, I wouldn't say to people, you mustn't watch this movie, it's crap. I would say, no, it's quite well done. And, kudos to Del Toro for making a good movie. I just, my hopes going into this maybe this is important to put my cards on the table. When I read Frankenstein for our episode, it was my first time reading it. And I had never read it in part because I thought I knew the story, and I thought I knew that that story had nothing to do with me. I don't like horror, and I really wasn't interested in that thing. When I read the book, I was struck by the conviction that very, very early on, I thought to myself, someone should make a movie about this. And I thought that knowing that many movies have been made, but I thought thinking, I don't think any of those movies count as a movie of this,
Hmm.
right? No one's really tried to deal with this story. They've veered off in their own directions. Now, to be fair, there's a Kenneth Branagh Frankenstein I haven't seen, so I don't speak for that. Um, and so when I saw the trailer for the Del Toro and I saw the way to which he was featuring the ship in the North, which is no part of any Frankenstein movie I'd seen before. It's not the normal cultural understanding of Frankenstein. I thought, oh my gosh, maybe this is it. He's really going to do a text faithful version of Frankenstein. And so I was especially disappointed that he did not.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're looking to say, if you want to engage the story of Frankenstein in an updated fashion, but in a way that is fairly text faithful, then I would go to Pete Peterson's stage production, which I think is really, I still have issues with some of the changes he made, but I think he has understood the heart of the story and has chosen to be faithful to the heart of the story. Even though he's pro monster, he doesn't make his monster innocent at all. And that is really good. But if you just want to, a great cinematic experience of a movie that's well done by a director who knows his business, telling an interesting story, then by all means, watch Del Toro's Netflix Frankenstein.
I don't think it's bad to watch. I don't think I would say don't watch it, but I don't know that I actually agree that it's good besides the sort of stuff we're talking about here. The cinematography is beautiful. I agree it could probably win an award for that. I was disappointed in a lot of the acting, frankly.
Mm,
I thought it was overacted at times. I thought Christopher Waltz's character, who I was excited when I saw he was in the movie because I think he's generally quite
he is
brilliant.
amazing. Yeah.
I didn't think he was very good in this. He
No,
just
he
didn't
was
live
not.
up to my expectation. And the other person I was disappointed in was Mia Goth. I just don't know that she was the right person for that character.
Hmm.
I have seen her in some other movies, and I generally think she's okay. I mean, I don't dislike her acting in other movies, but I just didn't think she was the right person for that
It
character
was
for that movie.
weird. It was acted weird, but I think part of that for me was that I wasn't sure how much to attribute to the acting and how much to attribute to his conception of the character because the character herself was weird.
Well, that's true.
Like she made her he made her into a weirdo, and it was hard to know what she should have been.
That's true. That is
But you're
true.
right. I did have. Thank you for reminding me of that. I did have that sense both that because I I saw Christoph Waltz for the first time in Inglorious Bastards,
Yeah, great.
um, in which he was just phenomenal. I mean, one of the great performances of all time, in my view. Um, and and I thought that he was very stereotypical
Yeah,
in this role.
he's great in
And
Django Unchained as well. I mean,
yeah, it
you
was
know, yeah,
another good film. Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, and then Mia's character, her Elizabeth, it's kind of bland, and it feels more Bronte than Shelley to me. That character, the way she's conceived, um, and this kind of tragic, ethereal female character. I don't know.
yeah. I think yeah. So I was disappointed in that because I thought the cast was you look at the cast list and you're like, wow, that's it's gonna be good. But I thought the acting did not live up to what I was expecting, and some of that I'm sure is the direction of the characters, but some of it I don't know. In a world
No.
where you write Elizabeth well, I still don't think Mia Goth would be the person to do it. I,
Yeah.
but well, good. Well, any other thoughts to add, Junius, about the film adaptation?
No, I think we've covered the main points.
Do you want to say
So
just a few more things about the Peterson adaptation?
Yeah, I will say a couple of things about it. I mean, one of the things that like it does it's amazing to me these two things were not communicating with each other. Pete didn't have a chance to see Del Toro's until after his own version had been done and recorded. And yet there are multiple same choices. Not that almost none of them were the choices that were the big shocking departures that Del Toro made, but in the smaller choices that were connected to how are we choosing to present the story, the creature story, there were multiple points at which they changed the novel in the same direction. And I think that's fascinating because to me that seems like evidence of a common culture and evidence of, this is how our culture some either how our culture responds to this or how our artists think that our culture will respond to this story. Um, I do think that, as I said, I do think like Del Toro, he is pro monster. I think he does decide for us that the creature is in the right and the creator is in the wrong. But I do appreciate that he doesn't make the creature guiltless. And that he, even though he has a relationship with Elizabeth, which he doesn't have in the book, and that's one of the things that they both added in. Um, it is, I think Pete is using that relationship with Elizabeth to clarify the monster's relationship to Victor, rather than to supplant it, which seems to be happening in Del Toro's version. And I think that was an interesting choice. So I, I found it. I recommend it highly as a really thought-provoking exercise in, but provoking thoughts both about the original story itself, but also provoking thoughts about what faithful adaptation could look like. Because I would class it in the end of the day as a faithful adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I'll check it out. I wanted to before we did this, but yeah, being sick kind of put me back a couple days.
Yeah,
I will say having not read it, I'm not opposed at all to a pro creature telling of the story.
yeah.
In fact, I think in many ways that our sort of cultural fascination with um the monster, the other, and a kind of vindication of them comes from a very Christian impulse. Um,
Hmm.
that
That no one is beyond redemption.
no one's beyond redemption, and no one is totally depraved. That
Mm,
there's something there that maybe is twisted and perverted in some way, but it's not irreparable, nor is it nor did it just you know um no one was just born that way and they're just so wicked that there's no possibility for them or anything like that.
hmm
So
hmm
I'm not opposed. We had an interesting conversation. I don't remember if this was before or maybe it may have been before you had joined the show, but we had Kristen Rudd on to talk about a course she was doing on monsters, and this was actually a pretty big part of the conversation because she was like, well, sometimes evil's just evil, and I understand that. I of course agree that evil needs to be called out and that we shouldn't be soft on it. But understanding why an evil person might decide to do something evil, I don't think is a bad exercise. In fact, I think it can be a good thing. Now, of course, the issue with that is you can skew it too far, where people are only ever victims of circumstance and never have any sort of
hmm
active participation in choosing the evil, and so
hmm
that is a problem as well. But um, I like to think when we're dealing with other people that we should at least be able to do some sort of that imaginative work on their
Yeah,
behalf. Like when someone
yeah.
cuts me off in traffic, it's not because they're an evil person. It's because they're rushed, they're having a bad day, they're
hmm
they're not paying attention. It's fine. It's fine. Um,
Yeah,
of course, we shouldn't maybe do the same thing to our own actions, right? When I cut someone off in traffic, it's because I'm inconsiderate or something like that,
right.
um, but
But
I
the
think
difference is that you know your heart and circumstances and you don't know theirs. And so we're not in a position to judge their circumstances and we ought to approach them with the utmost grace. Whereas with our own hearts, we're prone to excuse rather than to condemn. And so we have to correct in the other direction. I think
exactly.
I think all of that is what you're saying is very, very right. And I think Kristen's right too. Sometimes evil is evil. You don't always, there's not always a good explanation for an evil thing. Sometimes I think even the ancient philosophers were wrong about this, who say that no one ever chooses anything except insofar as he thinks it's good.
Mm,
In my own introspectively, I feel like sometimes I choose evil for the sake of the evil, that I just want to do something hurtful to myself or the world. And I don't think it will be good for me or others, but I choose it anyway, right?
yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, because we don't live it's not total depravity. Um, every bully is acting out of a place of hurt,
Right.
right? And understanding that doesn't excuse it, but it does create new paths for interacting with it and ultimately for potentially healing it.
That's right. That's right.
You know,
So yes, it's yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I'll be very interested to encounter the play and see kind of how that's all handled. So I look forward to it. Well, good. Our next main episode is Billy Budd Sailor. I don't know if you started reading that or not. I started it yesterday, and I'm excited to have that conversation. Talk about another Christ figure. Um,
yeah,
it's all over that book, so that'll be interesting. But listeners, thank you for tagging along for this discussion. Let us know in the comments on Substack what you thought of the movie if you watched it and how you think it compares to the book. We're always interested in hearing your opinions. If there are other movies or sort of cultural artifacts that kind of correlate with things that we've read, I think we'd be very open to having these kind of episodes. So if you like these episodes, let us know if you want more of that. And if you have ideas for things we could talk about, we'd love to hear it. So thank you for being along with us. And in the meantime, keep reading.